and wanted to just welcome everyone to the session today, as well as cover a few housekeeping notes. So hopefully everybody enjoyed that stretch break and is comfortably situated for an exciting and interesting hour to come. So this session is titled Interactive Storytelling in the Digital Era. But before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that as an organization with a provincial scope, the BCMA does recognize that its members, today's presenters, and attendees occupy the lands and territories of BC's Indigenous people. We ask all of you to reflect on the places where you reside and work, and to respect the diversity of cultures and experiences that form its richness. Specifically, calling in from Vancouver, a few of us, I'd like to acknowledge that we are joining from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And this acknowledgement is really a reminder of the discriminatory, racist, and colonial practices that have had a lasting legacy, not just in our city, but in our province and country, and continue to create barriers for Indigenous peoples and communities. So also, I wanted to share an interactive tool that was recently shared with us on our team in the spirit of the interactive session. It's something you can look at while I go through the other housekeeping notes, which is if you're interested in knowing the territories that you are occupying, you can put it in the chat. It's a great tool. Learn, reflect, and learn about the nations that you have come from and live on currently. So as mentioned, I'm Hannah. I'm also a senior producer at NGX Interactive. We've worked with some of you. I've been part of the BCMA for the last 7 years. And my pronouns are she and her. Thank you for joining us today. So on to the housekeeping that I mentioned. We will be recording this session, but encourage everyone who's comfortable doing so to switch on their video for the duration of the event. It's always nice to see people's faces and expressions. And please do use the chat feature to ask questions or make comments. And the chat feature is at the bottom of your screen. It may be hidden, so if you hold your mouse over the top or bottom of your screen, the feature menu should emerge. You can also calibrate the settings so that you are speaking to everybody or targeting, selecting specific attendees that you'd like to have a private message with, or to, just different privacy settings. So we do have a very large meeting today. It's great to see so many people here, and would like to offer everyone a chance to engage with each other. So the session will have a few minutes of small group discussions, which will take place in breakout rooms, and you'll be in very capable hands being guided by Jonny for that. So, but until then, we do ask everyone to stay muted to avoid any audio disruptions. In an effort to improve accessibility, there's also live transcription available. So I don't know if this is functional for this one. I think it might be. I know that there were some technical difficulties, but if you do click on live in the upper left-hand corner of this window, a separate website will open in your browser and the transcription will appear. This will not be available when using breakout rooms, but as with many things, it's a new feature for this year. And so, please try it out. If you do have feedback, let the BCMA team know. And without further ado, I would now like to hand it over to Jonny, who will be presenting this session. And just to break the ice, Jonny, a few fun facts about Jonny, who is also a transplant to BC like myself and at NGX. He is NGX's resident bread baking expert. He was an early adopter whose skills preceded the pandemic trend, just an FYI. I'm adding that little fact in myself. And he's as a BC transplant, he is an avid explorer of the province, and I asked him what his favorite historic site or museum in BC was in all his many travels, and he noted that his favorite historic site in BC are the railroads of the Thompson and Fraser Canyons. So, and now over to you, Jonny.
Thank you, Hannah. Just going to get the screen share set up. So hopefully you can see my slides. Is that correct? Great. Thank you very much. So yeah, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And I'm glad to have so many people here, both grateful for that and, to be honest, a little intimidated, but thanks for being here today. As ever, stories matter to us to connect us, engage the imagination, connect us to other times and places. And so I want to kind of start to explore that together here today. I think there are all sorts of tools that we can use to tell stories digitally. And specifically as 2020 pushes us to think about engaging audiences at a distance and outside of our museums and galleries, that's really going to be our focus today. So thinking about, as we try and bring exhibit experiences to digital space, an online space, how can we do that in a way that is engaging, inviting, achievable, affordable, etc. I think I want to kind of constrain some things that we will focus on, as well as point out some things that I don't intend to discuss. I think social media and digital storytelling via social media platforms is like a whole nother avenue that we won't explore today. And similarly, hosting virtual events and those types of things also, I think, to be treated separately. So I think focusing today on telling stories in a digital environment and how can we use a range of design tools to do that in a vivid way. So with that in mind, my goals for today are that each of us on the call, no matter like the size of the institution that we come from, the tools at our disposal, the financial resources we have access to, that everyone can find some new idea to take with them and apply to their own digital projects, whatever that might be. So I want to talk about our creative process, then also some process, and then also like the nuts and bolts of financing digital projects. So as far as our trajectory, the first kind of first section of the presentation will look at what we can learn from other forms of digital storytelling and look to some examples to guide us there. In the second section of the presentation, we'll be hosting Sherry Kajiwara from the National Nikkei Museum and speaking with her in a kind of curated Q&A about her recent experience developing a digital project, Righting Wrongs. That's a Virtual Museum of Canada project that we were able to help with. And then finally, as our kind of outro here, I'm just going to introduce some sources of funding that people may be already aware of, but maybe not, in an effort to say, okay, how can we make these ideas happen? So that's kind of our intended trajectory. I think Hannah mentioned, you know, I work for NGX Interactive. I think some of us on the call have familiarity. But for those who don't, we're coming up to being 20 years old. We create a range of media elements for museums, galleries, and other narrative spaces. We do primarily work in physical space, so integrating media into the exhibit environment, but we also do some work primarily in this like digital online landscape. Within that, my work is as a content strategist, so I'm part of our creative team, helping to like generate ideas and build storylines. So I can speak to that side kind of more fluently than some of the project management or the technical side, although, you know, I can speak to that a little bit too. So that's who I am, but I'm curious about who everyone else on this call is and where they're coming from and what their, you know, hopes and aspirations are. Part of the impetus for this was feedback from the BCMA in recent surveys where members are asking for support in thinking about how to approach creating digital experiences. So I'd like to experiment with a chat box brainstorm or a chat storm. Please fill in the blank in the chat box. So how would you finish this sentence for yourself? When I think about creating an online exhibit, I feel, okay, Ben, thank you for getting us started. Great, Amber. Okay, overwhelmed, that's coming through a few times. Out of my depth, okay. Wow, this is coming thick and fast, thank you. Great, concern about quality. Okay, lots of possibilities. Great, awesome, thank you for playing along. You know, I think my goal here is to help us go from, okay, I'm not sure, there's so many possibilities, I'm a little confused, I don't know where to start, to like, okay, here are some steps that we can take, and here are ways we can make it inviting for people, and here's a way that we can feel a little bit more confident. So let's jump straight in. So there are all sorts of tools for storytelling in digital space, visuals, text, media, video, etc. There's so many tools, and so I think it's worth being able to kind of cherry pick what are some examples that we like and how can we borrow from them. And as we think about bringing museum experiences online, there are all sorts of other forms of digital storytelling that already exist that we can look to. So we'll go through precedents that kind of get at 4 guiding concepts. So I think if part of this question is like, oh, where do we start? How do we get a foothold? Part of it can be like, okay, these 4 guiding concepts can be starting points to channel our ideation, help us think about these. So we'll go through these in more detail, one at a time. But narrative shapes, what is the arc through our story? How are we creating a story, rather than just presenting information? Secondly, what tools are we going to give visitors to explore? It's clear what it looks like to move through physical space. What does it look like for visitors to move through digital space? Thirdly, how can our design choices and our form enhance the story that we're trying to tell? And finally, thinking about characters and the people in our story. So I think, some of these concepts are obviously familiar from any type of exhibit design, and some of them there's like little twists that apply, certainly in the digital realm in particular. So to start with narrative shapes, I think, as ever, a really central idea is what story do we want our online exhibit to tell? Being able to identify what is the big idea and how can we shape a journey through information. I think one of the major pitfalls of developing digital content is the visualization of the digital realm as just a repository or a database or an archive where we can put anything. So thinking about, okay, what's the story and how are we going to move through it? So tools like this narrative arc can help us provide a focus. So, what's in and what's out. So providing a focus is really part of the value of this. Helping us thinking about sequencing and progression. What is the emotional experience that a visitor is going to have as they move through our story? And what is the emotional register of kind of different moments here? I think this story arc is relatively, excuse me. The story arc is in some ways like quite familiar from all sorts of forms of storytelling. But for people for whom this is not as familiar, we can map some version of this onto all sorts of stories. The intro, we get a glimpse of a scene, maybe we meet a character or two. The hook, there's some emotional complication or something that draws us in. The rising action, like the plot thickens, the sense of intrigue or drama building and leading to some type of climax or kind of critical event or resolution, and then an outro. And so, even though these types of shapes come from like linear media, whether that's film or literature, I think we can think about creating user journeys that have an emotional arc and a direction. And I think we can play with the shape of those stories. We don't need to be constrained to an arc. And I think a key is thinking about what is the beginning, what is the middle, and what is the end, and how are we drawing users through. And so for the first example that I want to share, the direction is really straight down. And it's a very simple example. And I think part of the reason that I like it is because I think it shows that with relatively simple tools, we can generate intrigue, create a journey, and invite users to want to go explore that. So I'll have it play and sprinkle in some comments here and there. So here's our beginning. You can see it is very simple, but you can see also, like right from the start, that scroll bar on the right really conveys like, okay, there's a lot of ocean left to go explore. I think we start to see that this is like a human story as well as an ecological one. And there's really kind of judicious use of detail. You could imagine a version of this where you could click every organism, you could find out more. And I think this example is like very careful in where it chooses more details and where it just allows it to be simple. I also think that just only having this detailed depth as the kind of consistent ticker is just helpful in terms of, it's very simple information, but as I say, communicates a lot. I think obviously the experience of scrolling down through it is different from just watching the video, but I want to point out this is like a screen recording of me using this site. And as you can see, it just, the ocean goes on, and peppered in are these little moments of intrigue and then of narrative progression that help keep the story moving and keep people kind of bought in. So as we think about whether it's the straight line down or the arc, what is our beginning, middle, and end, I think we can also kind of expand that out a little bit and think about other forms. On the far left, the spiral. Are you starting at the center with some key personal detail and moving out towards something general? Or are you starting with something general and then moving into something more focused? The second and third images in the center and the right start to get into possibilities for branching narratives where there's opportunity for choice and decision making, like variations on the kind of choose your own adventure paradigm. And that has all sorts of complexity associated with it. But I think just illustrates the point that we can start to think beyond just an arc, especially if we're giving users choices to make decisions. So that moves us to the second point, which is the second guiding concept is agency. And what I mean by this is how much can users influence the world, or how much can they make choices that have an impact? As I mentioned at the beginning, I think it's clear what it looks like to move through physical space, but what does it look like to make choices and move through digital space? So gamification is a relevant idea here. And in some of the material I was looking through from the BCMA, there was some comments saying like, hey, I know gamification is a thing, but I don't really know like how to think about it. So this precedent gets into giving users the opportunity to make choices. It comes from the Financial Times, and I think it's a good example of innovation in digital narratives where the output is not an article, but the output is something that places users in the scene, and they occupy the role of the subject of the story. The setup is that the visitor is a full-time Uber driver, and this is their challenge. And as they proceed, they need to make decisions about what car they're going to drive. When their windshield gets chipped, what are they going to do about it? And then how are they going to deal with unruly, passengers, etc. And as you can see, like the visual style of the front end is relatively simple. It's bright, vibrant, block, but it is a static game. There's no animation. Like it's visually very achievable. On the back end, obviously, it's more complicated. But I think if we, I'm going to actually jump. No, that'll be too complicated. There are choices, but the choices are constrained. A user has some agency, but comes back to these like common points as they go. So constraining the range of possibilities. And the output of this is that users see how their choices have affected the world and build empathy with the types of decisions that the story is really about. What does it mean for an Uber driver to balance, like, their family life with the need to get back in the car? So that is like, gamification without kind of complex graphics, but really telling a story through gamification. And the second example of movement through a story comes from the New York Times. It's less programmatically complex, but provides another vision of what it can mean to look around digital space. So this is a screen recording of me exploring this site. So there's some audio here, and we'll let it play. So it may not be clear here, but the experience of using this site is dragging this 360 panorama around. So again, a pretty simple visual asset. My choice as a user is like, where do I want to look? And then on the bottom right, you can see one of 9. There are 9 scenes that I can move through. So I can move through time, and I can also have an approximation of moving through space. So I think we also start to see the role of audio here and how we can think about appealing to other senses or using other tools in our digital storytelling. And so that leads us into the next guiding concept I want to touch on, which is, so I just looking at this note that the audio is not coming through. Let me share my screen here. Okay, thank you, Justin. So the next kind of guiding concept I want us to get into here is how can we integrate design, like visual design, audio design, with our messaging, and how can style reinforce messaging, and also help us to differentiate the online exhibits we're creating from a website. How can we actually disrupt the familiar experience of using the internet and make it something more evocative? So this is an example that comes from Australia. And can I confirm that people are getting audio here? Thank you. So, the sound effects, there's also this kind of layered visual style where there's some layers to the image. And as we move down, we can see that here. I think moments like this, where our familiar experience of just scrolling down through information is disrupted by, bringing this graphic novel style to life, is a helpful way to think about like expanding the kind of palette of what we can do. You'll also see in a moment here, we're going to, on the right, there's this chapter bar, and we're going to jump from chapter 1, this introduction, to chapter 4, which I will let play because I think it's a great example of how relatively simple combination of text, this parallax effect of multiple layers of image and sound, can combine to create something quite evocative. I think with expression in mind, and getting into thinking about audio and how much audio can convey both informationally, but also of a mood and an atmosphere, the final example of expression that I want to share is from a performance organization based in New York that is a self-guided audio tour of a cemetery. And I think it's interesting to think about, when we think about creating digital experiences, what does that look like in the absence of a screen? And I think there's a lot of opportunity for, particularly in outdoor space, to provide tools for self-guided exploration, both outside of the gallery and outside of the screen. The last of these 4 elements that I want to introduce is the question of characters, and in 3 pieces. Firstly, audience. Obviously considerations of audience are central to exhibit design and experience design. And I think in the digital realm, there are also these layers that don't apply in the gallery space as much. For example, what are their digital norms and habits? What platforms does our target audience gravitate to? What are their expectations for interaction? What interfaces are they most comfortable with? So some additional audience considerations to think through. The second character to consider, the narrator. I think in digital storytelling, in addition to kind of the implied voice that might be embedded in text, we have a lot of opportunity to visualize and represent our narrator and play with who that narrator is and explore narrative perspective. So the example on screen is this little man, Guy the Guide, who we've been developing for a historic site in Eastern Canada as part of like a tablet-based virtual tour in the gallery, as a way to bring some playfulness, some fun, some lightheartedness to that experience and like disrupt this kind of stodginess. But I think there's also all sorts of possibilities with visualizing a narrator or expressing a narrator for expanding our representation. And we've been doing some work on the history of space exploration and aerospace, and it's a very white male story. And so using narrative personas and representing narrative personas to find more ways into stories for more people. Finally, as far as characters, obviously all good stories are about people, and who are the people that we want to showcase and focus on. This example comes from work that we have done with Craig Darroch Castle on the island, taking an in-gallery virtual tour, an in-gallery tablet-based tour they had and taking it online. And so in this case, you can see like, okay, pen and ink drawing, some first-person text, but then also the ability to listen to an actor voicing the persona of Kate McDonald. So digital tools as a way to bring these protagonists to life and provide some direct connection between audience and protagonist. Okay, forgive me, I know I'm kind of jogging along here. So to review, these are 4 guiding concepts. By no means are they the only guiding concepts. they're all connected. I think it's clear that expression, characters, narrative are all interconnected, but 4 footholds. And so I want to turn it back to all of you, and just kind of provide a moment of pause to digest and think about this, and to discuss it a little bit. So all being well with our technological integration here, the BCMA hosts are going to set up some breakout rooms. So you'll go into a small group of 3 or 4 for 5 minutes. And please have the conversation go wherever feels right. But I also do want to send you in with a prompt. So please share with the other people in your room, what digital idea are you or your team exploring? And is there anything from this first section that you can take with you that you want to hold on and apply? What ideas are you having? Is anything kind of resonating here? So Vanessa, hopefully you're out there and we can fire up the breakout rooms. If you haven't been in a breakout room before, it's really straightforward. If you follow the on-screen prompts, you should be all good.
I'm creating the breakout rooms now. Let's see how that goes.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll just pause here as everyone kind of comes out of the breakout rooms and then keep going. Okay, I can't really tell if everyone's back, but it seems like lots of people are. I'm curious to use one of my favorite interactive tools, the thumbometer. If thumbs up is like, oh, that was really useful, productive conversation, and thumbs down is like, that was useless. So, where were, obviously I wasn't in any of the rooms. How was that for people? Great. Okay, nice. Digital and physical thumbs. Thank you. And some in the middle. Thank you, Marisa. Okay, great. So I hope that Sherry is on the call. Can I confirm that?
Yes, I am. Let me just turn my camera on.
Awesome. Thank you, Sherry. Hi. Thank you so much. Okay, so the next section of our presentation here, I'm really grateful to introduce Sherry Kajiwar, the director and curator of the Nikkei National Museum. Sherry and NGX have been working closely on Righting Wrongs, which is a Virtual Museum of Canada supported project. And Sherry and I spoke this morning, and she let me know that they've just submitted phase 5 of that. So they have made a lot of really great process. So Sherry, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. And can I start just by asking you to introduce the Righting Wrongs project to people who won't have encountered it before?
Absolutely. Righting Wrongs is grounded in a 7-year research and public history project called Landscapes of Injustice that my museum has been partnered on, that looks at the dispossession of Japanese Canadians in the 1940s. Landscapes, or LOI as we like to affectionately call that project, started in 2014 with 4 years of research and 3 years of knowledge mobilization, of which we are now in the final year. We just opened the physical exhibit, Broken Promises, that is a knowledge mobilization output of LOI, at my museum, which I just want to clarify, Hannah gave a great traditional acknowledgement earlier. And in addition to that, we are also on the Hakamium speaking peoples and Quequitlam First Nations locations. So just wanted to acknowledge that extension. Back in 2016, the project lead of LOI, Dr. Jordan Stanger-Ross from the University of Victoria, was heading up the government records cluster and came across a file from Library and Archives Canada that contained over 300 letters of protest written by individuals from my community in the 1940s. And he was so moved by the content that he encouraged me to consider developing some kind of online exhibit to make them available to the public. We had experience with really minor WordPress template online exhibits, and there are 2 VMC community-based projects that you'll find online if you search us, but they were produced before my time. I took over as director curator from Beth Carter in 2015. And as I did a bit of research on possible funding to support a digital initiative, I came across VMC's investment fund application. So long story short, we were successful, and our story, Righting Wrongs, begins with a question of what is home? And our narrative arc developed with NGX is divided over 5 main chapters, actually 4 main chapters initially, but we ended up expanding that to 5. That includes videos, text, of course, visuals, and a gallery of archive photographs, usually in each section. There is the scroll feature, and then a dive deeper, go deeper section. And the story is organized over the chapters of, well, both with Japanese and English titles: Kibo, Hope, story of the first generation of immigrants from Japan to Canada; Chapter 2, Ikigai is worth, it's the raison d'etre, it's the community development, how we really established ourselves in Canada. Third is Gaman, endurance. This is where the protest letters really come in and are highlighted. The fourth chapter, Hibiki or echoes, is really the legacies that remain today. And as I said, originally our application was just based on those 4 chapters, but the VMC project manager really recommended that the protest letters not just be an add-on, not just be an index, that it become a chapter of its own. So it does have that section. And again, there's an intro video. There are the actual photos of the 300 plus letters, and you can really dive deep. Additionally, there is a link to sample lesson plans because of who we decided our target audience would be. So that's really the overview of righting wrongs.
Thank you, Sherry. And so while that's happening, I've been kind of, playing a look through of that site. And I think I just want to showcase, there's so many things that we could showcase. I'd like to showcase one more of the video assets that is embedded here. As Sherry mentioned, the letters themselves are a key feature, obviously, of the whole project. And so there's the ability to explore those. And then also, as part of this, connecting those artifacts to the contemporary audience, I want to showcase one embedded piece of media, and then we'll kind of take a step back and talk through some of the learnings that Sherry and her team have had from going through this process. So yeah.
February 24th, 1945. You have informed me that my property and chattels have been sold. I never consented to the sale, but have at all times and do now object to the sale of my said property. However, I am in destitute circumstances, for my present earning is not sufficient to support my family, owing to the weather not being suitable to logging operations here. I would request you to forward me $50 from my fund each month in order to maintain myself and my family. I wish it made clear that it is only being accepted under protest arising out of what I consider the wrongful sale and dispossession of my property. Need of the fund is very urgent. It would be appreciated if you will kindly forward it immediately. My name is Laura Fukumoto, and that letter was written by my great-grandfather, Toyamon Fukumoto.
So now that we have a little bit of context established, Sherry and I are going to have some kind of curated conversation. I'm conscious that we have just over 10 minutes before the end of our session here. So Sherry, can you talk about some key steps in the process from the idea and the research process you alluded to and the finished product for people who are out there thinking about how they might undertake their own project? What were some key milestones that you went through?
Well, first of all, we did have a very powerful, compelling trove of letters to really build the story on. So the first thing is you need to have a really strong message that you want to put out there. This was a brand new experience for my little community-centered nonprofit museum. We are so used to being organic and nimble and really iterative on projects. And this was, you have to remember, they're all pre-pandemic. So the learning curve for digital literacy for us was extremely steep. And we worked very closely with NGX right from the application of the VMC grant through to the end. And as Jonny described earlier, they've got almost 20 years of, this expert, and they are a digital storytelling specialist used to working, from my observation, on very large scale projects. So in our case, we we're like the little David to their Goliath, I guess. So we really needed to figure out our work cultures, each other's work cultures, and learn how to work well together. So NGX helped us with the narrative content in terms of the narrative arc and all of that from the beginning. We had our own researchers. The digital content provider on our end was Suzanne Tabata and her creative team. Of course, my museum staff, including Carolyn Nakagawa, who is our education coordinator and also my PA on this. Lisa Ueda is our collections manager, and Linda Kamoto-Reed is our very talented research archivist. And with all of us, including many other members of the community, we were able to put the story together. The letters are one thing, but they need to be contextualized in order to tell a really compelling site that users would want to travel through. So we needed to contextualize it. We had all the archival photos you see on site are from, I believe, primarily from our collection. Tabata Productions commissioned the artwork, the illustrations, the poetry, the drawings that you see. NGX was very sensitive to our community's input, our cultural input. I think, Johnny, you alluded to who tells the story. It really is coming first person from the lived experience of the Japanese Canadian community. And so all of that came into the process. We had a compelling story. We were really clear about who we wanted to tell the story to. We decided which platform worked best, which was very much a learning curve for us, as I said. We had to really engage our key stakeholders. And then once we had all of that in place, we really had to work on maintaining a culture of trust, cooperation, communication, and problem solving. But Johnny, as you said, we've got the phase 5 submission in yesterday, and I've already heard from our rep at VMC that it's going to be reviewed by the first week of November. And fingers crossed, if we don't hit any major hurdles, that this may be our Christmas present to the world. Awesome. If not, if we still have to go through some tweaking, then it will definitely be out in the first part of the new year.
Great. Yeah, I mean, congratulations on kind of, coming so far. I think the other question, given our time is finite here, what were some key learnings for you? Undertaking a larger scale project, embarking on something bigger. For what were some things that, okay, if you were going to do it again next time, that you would either do the same or do differently?
Well, I think much of it would be the same, given the type of stories that we do tell. I mean, the Nikkei National Museum is all about preserving, honoring, and sharing Japanese Canadian history and heritage. So we are very, very specific, of course. And depending on where you are coming from in the audience, you would have to have your own point of view. Our experience is unique, but we invite visitors with the Writing Wrong site to really recognize echoes in today's headlines, resonate with stories of dislocation, migration, and the struggle to rebuild from fragments, and really reflect on the idea of home. Would I embark on something like this again? You know what? It's massive. I've survived this one. I don't know that I would be so quick to jump into another one. But having said that, with the Broken Promises exhibit, if you go to the Nikkei National Museum exhibit and go to our exhibit page, you will see a lot of digital options, an EPUB. There's going to be a self-guided tour app on there soon. Our educational kit had to pivot to electronic just because of the pandemic and really needing to move away from touchable interactive objects. But I do highly recommend it. The Virtual Museum of Canada offers many options. I know, John, you're going to talk about other funding models, but at the VMC, there's the community level, which is, I believe, 15,000 and less projects, and then the investment fund, which is 250,000, I believe, still, which is the one this was. If you're going to go for the big one, you really do need to have your team in place. And yeah, it's just all about what I said earlier about the flexibility and the open communications.
Sherry, thank you so much. I'm sorry to need to insert myself. I feel it's a shame in some ways, given that we have people on the call from the VMC program, and we have Sherry here, and so many people who I'm sure there are questions out there, and I'm sorry that we can't get into that. I do want to firstly thank you, Sherry, for joining us, and I'm sorry that we couldn't spend more time. And in closing here, I wanted to not just present a bunch of interesting ideas and then leave people kind of scratching their head about like, okay, well, that's great, but we don't have the resources for that. And so Abigail from the BCMA has been super generous with helping me kind of compile some slides that I think will be really more useful as reference material after the fact, rather than me kind of talking through a lot of detail of each one. Perhaps these are resources people are aware of, perhaps they're not. If they're redundant, that's great, but if they're useful, that's even better. So in addition to the Virtual Museums of Canada program, there are some other funding streams, both at a national and provincial level, that may be relevant to some institutions here. Some focused on artistic practice specifically, with this layer about new technology. So the Sector Innovation and Development Award. As you can see, the deadline for that coming up is in November. Again, a national level award focused specifically on digital literacy and intelligence. So I think a lot of overlap here. And as you can see on the bottom left here, like significant amounts of money that are available. Some other like sector focused ones, this TELUS award with a little bit more like a public health emphasis, and deadline at the beginning of next year. Within BC, some community arts-based awards, again with an arts focus, and then I think the Creative BC Interactive Fund, there's a huge amount of overlap with a lot of what we're talking about. Finally, not a source of funding, but I think a really interesting source of competence and skill building and kind of ideation building, this Digital Ladders program that Sherry alerted me to. And you can see at the bottom left, consultations, learning labs, and prototyping labs, generating ideas, bringing ideas forward, and bringing ideas further. So I think that brings me to like the close of my slides. I think I will figure out with the BCMA how to post the slides. Once we do that, there's links in all the slides for all of the precedents that I showed, so people will be able to dive into that. So thank you so much. I think let's experiment with a question or two through the chat. So let's give it a try. If you have a burning question, now's the time, and we'll see if we can sneak it in before the final whistle blows here. Sherry, do you want to take that one?
Everyone who participated was, they were paid. There were honorariums, and depending on, are you referring, the question, if people aren't reading it, I think it was, did we compensate our narrator? And are you specifically asking about the Laura Fukumoto film? If you aren't, that is only one of several videos in the Writing Wrong site. And yes, everyone who participated was, there was a budget in for it. We budgeted for honorariums for talent that we would need to engage.
Okay, this is this point about accessibility is a really critical one. And I think, how much is it typically built into digital storytelling plan? I think there's a really wide range of answers to that question, and that different clients who we work with have really a wide range of appetites for how much time, effort, energy they are able to, or willing to, or interested in investing in this. I think we always thinking about it to some extent, and that can be related to like the videos we played had the open captions at the bottom, so that anyone watching the video, those are baked in. There's no choice to turn them on or off. They're there. There's a lot. Sorry, go ahead, Sherry.
John, I was just going to say, when you work on a VMC project, especially at the investment fund level, there are very rigorous accessibility rules in place. And so they are, and not even just accessibility for closed captioned and transcriptions, but also for usage, user experience on different types of devices. So those things are already built into the parameters of delivering a VMC product.
Great. One and all, I want to respect everyone's time and thank you again for joining us. Thanks for the people behind the scenes for like helping join all the dots. Sherry, once again, thank you so much for joining us. Yeah, and thank you all for your time. And my details are at the end of the slides. If you want to reach out, please do. And yeah, I hope that you can take something with you and that there's something useful for you to take back to your home institutions. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Johnny. This is Ryan from the BCMA. Hannah had to duck out early, but I just wanted to thank you so much for a stimulating and great conversation. And thank you, Sherry, as well for sharing and for everyone who came here and participated. The 2020 BCMA Virtual Conference continues tomorrow. Please join us for a day of sessions and especially join us for our first ever virtual awards ceremony. We're trying out some really fun new stuff, and I think we're going to have a great time. So we hope to see you all tomorrow night at 6 p.m. All right. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you.